Does a soldier have a, remember there's jus ad bellum, which is the justice of going to war, jus in bello, which is the justice once you're within war, the actions you take within war. But at the jus ad bellum level, the macro level, is a soldier given any responsibility, or does he have any particular duty? No, I think you're right, Paul. In our Army, we do not allow the soldier or grant the soldier an ability to make decisions on particular wars. This is our, as we've discussed, and this is what Lieutenant Watada attempted to do and didn't. Well, in the end, it kind of did work out for him. But the Army said no, you can't do that, and the Army's always said that. One quick thing about this, because I want to segue a little bit into rules of engagement. Martin Luther is the first reader that I came across who discussed selective conscientious objection. Remember, with Augustine and Aquinas, no other church father had actually discussed the idea of selective conscientious objection. The idea that you can oppose a particular, the idea that a soldier does have the duty to determine whether a war is just based on jus ad bellum criteria. The idea that you can select, or that you must make a decision on individual wars. No other church father had addressed that. Obviously, the early church fathers were dealing with something entirely differently. Can a Christian serve? But when you get to Augustine and Aquinas, what they did say, they said two things that I think indicate that they would not, if you point blank asked them, they would have said no selective conscientious objection. The first thing they said is that the phrase in that Jesus' statement to Peter, "Put up thy sword," referred to what? Does anybody remember? Who according to Augustine and Aquinas, are the pacifists in our society and are legitimately supposed to be pacifists? The priests, right? The clergy, the priests. And in fact, remember that I believe it was Aquinas who said that. Aquinas was very explicit that referred to Peter was representing the bishops of the church and all bishops to come, and that was the importance, or that was the significance of Jesus saying it to Peter. Of course, Peter was the one that used the sword, but again, the whole thing being Peter is an example of the church. But Augustine would say the same thing. He just wasn't quite as explicit about Peter as the bishop. But that the clergy were the pacifists and the laity were to perform their duty, and that's the other word, is duty. Remember that Augustine and Aquinas talked about a duty concept. There are times when a citizen has a duty. Remember, this is not an all-volunteer army necessarily. A citizen has a duty to defend his country. Okay, so that tends to say that their view on selective conscientious objection would have been probably, look, once your state has declared war, and again, they assumed a Christian state, then you do have a duty to fight in that war at times. In fact, remember Augustine talked about even a duty at times, or a duty to obey the orders of your sovereign, and that a soldier is innocent regardless of the order of the commander, because he's following an order, and even if it's unlawful, that soldier is innocent. Okay, now that's a segue into rules of engagement, because that is not what the Army believes. When we ask questions about a soldier's responsibility and duty, jus in bello, inside of war, that's a whole other subject. Okay, the soldier is not allowed to determine whether a particular war is just or unjust. But once you're inside that war, as you may know, and I'm sure you do, we have prosecuted soldiers for some of the things that they've done in Iraq, not just for things they did on their own, but for orders.
That's the action level.
That's the action level.
Pass these out. This addresses that.
It's all unclassified.
This is
just to kill us after this class.
Just for the record, I got this off of a blog on public on the web. So, and what this is an ROE card, rules of engagement card. Each soldier, ideally, not ideally, but is to have a card like this that is tailored for their particular theater of operation. And what I would like for us to do is just, if someone could read this card, starting with the first top left side, and notice just a couple things. As we read it, feel free to point out any principles of jus in bellum that you see that we've already studied. So, or if there are any tensions.
Is this current?
The soldier that put this up, or the former soldier, or whatever, reference that this is for the current
Okay, because at the bottom, these ROE will remain in effect until your commander, and then we're missing that one.
That's the rest of the secret.
Right.
I'm kidding. Well, yeah, I think what I would say to this, because the lawyers do teach rules of engagement to soldiers. This is the default. These are the default rules of engagement that are in effect now. I think what this would go on to say is until your commander probably says otherwise. It may say it in a different way. That's where you're getting what we call SRO, standing rules of engagement. Those are secret, and those refer to specific campaigns, missions, and they deal with a specific threat on the ground. So those are secret. In fact, obviously, if we had one, we wouldn't really be allowed to show it without getting in trouble. But this is the default, and this is really what any soldier is given, and what any soldier knows when they get on a plane and get ready to go to Iraq
And
or Afghanistan.
it's current within the last few years. I mean, it has Arabic words in it. Someone like to
I will.
help out?
Nothing on this card prevents you from using deadly force to defend yourself. 1. Enemy military and paramilitary forces may be attacked subject to the following instructions. 1A. Positive identification, PID, is required prior to engagement. PID is reasonable certainty that your target is a legitimate military target. If no PID, contact your next higher commander for decision. 1B. Do not engage anyone who has surrendered or cannot fight due to sickness or wounds. C. Do not target or strike any of the following except in self-defense to protect yourself, your unit, friendly forces, and designated persons or property under your control. That would be civilians, hospitals, mosques, churches, shrines, schools, museums, national monuments, and any other historical and cultural sites. D. Do not fire into civilian populated areas or buildings unless the hostile force is using them for hostile purposes, or if necessary for your self-defense. E. Minimize collateral damage.
Wow.
Thank you.
We use these at home.
I will remember that. That's good.
Does anything stand out in this particular reading that sort of remind you of anything we've studied over the last few weeks with regard, or that are on that sheet that?
Well, yeah, proportional force.
Yeah.
Proportionality.
And what about civilians?
Yeah.
Notice what it does not say. It does not say never. There are no nevers on there. That's a double negative. There's not a never fire at civilians. It does not say that, or never fire into civilian populations. Now these are very bad things that we want to avoid at almost all costs, but they do carve out exceptions.
Don't target or strike, except in self-defense.
Right.
How's that different than what we've? That
Yeah.
seems to pick a particular line of reasoning that is within the Christian tradition, but not necessarily speaks to all the Christian tradition. Would you?
Self-defense.
Self-defense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, Augustine would definitely say self-defense is not permitted, but that if you're defending others, it's absolutely sometimes required to use force. Although I guess there are times when a soldier might be using self-defense and there's nobody else around, but certainly this allows for self-defense.
Yeah, and it's funny, the way military operations are, self-defense is defending your neighbor
Right.
as well, because if you let yourself get killed, then the person is next.
Right. And I recall this is when we teach rules of engagement to soldiers who are preparing to go to Iraq. See that nothing on this card prevents you, that top part? That is the one thing we always want soldiers to remember. What we don't want a soldier to do is to be in a situation where he is trying to
Meet the rules and
create
regulations.
create a legal matrix in
think
his
of what they
mind.
were.
He's like, oh no, can I fire on this person? Can I not? Oh shoot, what is this? What does
And
this
then-
mean? Over here. And suddenly the suicide bomber has already driven into his tank. Okay. That is the default method is, the default mode is you can use deadly force at any time to defend yourself. Okay. And then the second thing that we always teach is positive identification, PID. Everybody calls it PID. And where do you see this a lot in Iraq? And I can think of an example.
Well, positive identification that places the responsibility on the soldier to judge at that given second or fraction of a second if this is hostile intent. Now, ideally, you can tell by uniform, right, or weapon. But in today's, particularly in the the engagements and wars that the U.S. and Western nations fight today, it's judging hostile intent is not so simple.